Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the new Yankee Workshop. A few years ago, we paid a visit to the Winterthur Museum in Delaware, where among other things, they have a wonderful collection of Pennsylvania Dutch painted furniture. We found a dower chest, which we really liked, and we built our own version back here at the workshop. This time we found a painted cupboard. So we'll go there next, show you the cupboard, and then we'll come back here and build our own version right here in the new Yankee Workshop. This wonderful mansion was built by Henry Francis DuPont and his wife. The center section that you're looking at was built in 1929 to house their wonderful collection of antiques. One of Henry Francis DuPont's favorite cars was this 1959 Silver Cloud Rolls-Royce, and it looks right at home here in front of the mansion. Every time we come here, we're impressed by the quality of the collection. Let's see if we can find our old friend Greg Landrey, the Director of Conservation. Oh, Greg, you have so many wonderful objects to look at here. It's hard to know where to let the eye rest. And what's this? I think they call this spatterware?
That's correct, that's spatterware.
Well, you know, a few years ago, you helped us with a dower chest. It was a decoratively painted chest. It was very popular. A lot of people built it. So I'm thinking, well, maybe we should get something else to add to the collection, a painted piece, you know, around the same time period. Ooh, look at this pottery. This is nice.
Well, one piece you might have interest in is this dower chest over here.
You know, that's a little more decorative than I would like, and we've already built a chest. I'm looking for something a little more simple. You know, it doesn't have to be a chest.
All right. Well, we have this a painted cupboard here. Is that of interest?
Yeah, that's an interesting piece. What can you tell me about that?
Well, let's see. Look at the door. This has a raised panel on the inside, which is rather nice arch to it. That's right. The cornice is nice. It's a pinched cornice, two turned rosettes on it, which I rather like. Chamfered edge. Let's see. On the lower case, this is in two parts. This separates here. It's two parts. This door has a OG type molding on it.
Another flat panel.
Flat panel. And the hinges, those are rat tail hinges. Hand wrought.
And the finish is just a simple one color paint, it looks like. Maybe a milk paint, you think?
It could be. Analytically, it's something we could do here to find out.
Well, and that gets me to thinking, you have so many objects to take care of here, from textiles to pieces of furniture. How do you do that?
That's a big part of the Winterthur story. As stewards of this priceless collection, we're responsible for its care, which is an ongoing process when dealing with things that are prone to deterioration. The wood ages. The finish changes over time. The light and temperature affects these antiques, so we must learn how to protect them if we want them to remain in good condition for current and future generations. Our resources include a large, well-equipped modern library and conservation facility. We employ experts who understand textiles and fabrics. Elsewhere, conservators are completing the missing ornament needed to restore a valuable old clock. Here's a textile conservator doing fiber identification on a quilt. Here's a painting conservator carrying out a sensitive cleaning to a portrait damaged in the recent hurricane in Mississippi. So it's a formidable challenge, Norm, just to stay ahead of all we like to do.
An impressive story, Greg. I'm glad to see the care you and your colleagues are giving to these priceless antiques. Thanks, too, for this look behind the scenes at Winterthur. Well, here's our version of that cupboard we saw at Winterthur. And when I first saw the piece, I said, this will be a snap to build. Turns out that some of it is very easy and other parts are challenging. For instance, making this arch door with this nice bead detail, that's a challenge. And executing this pinched cornice with these little turned rosettes takes some thought. Now, I've built ours out of poplar because we're going to paint it. The top half has several fixed shelves for storage. The piece is in two sections. The top is separate from the bottom, so it's easy to move. The lower case also has plenty of room for storage with one fixed shelf, and it sits on this molded base. Now, if you'd like to build your own version of the painted cupboard, a measure drawing is available with the materials list, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. I want to start by building the lower carcass, or case. So over here on the workbench, I have some panels that I've made up. Again, out of poplar. boards that are glued together and reinforced with biscuits. I've sanded them smooth and cut them to size. These are the sides for the lower case, and I've laid out for a dado for the bottom shelf, the middle shelf, and I'm going to make a rabbet along the top edge for some cleats to secure the top. We'll do that first. I've set up my stacked dado in the table saw, and I've adjusted the fence to make the dado for the bottom shelf first. But before we use any power tools, let's talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. While I have the dado set up, I want to make the grooves for the shelves in the upper case. And the setup is a little bit different because the boards are narrower. I have installed a stop block which sets the distance, and it keeps the end of the board away from the fence, preventing any kickback. I'm also using my miter gauge to keep it square as I push it through. Now I'm set up to make the rabbets. I've installed my sacrificial fence, and this is a fancy one. It's a piece of plywood covered with high pressure laminate, makes it nice and slick, and it clamps over my permanent fence. Part of the dado set sits under this sacrificial strip, far away from my fence. Now when I push it through, I get an open cut. Now I have to make rabbets in the upper and lower case to receive the back panel. Well, now it's time for a little assembly. Some glue in the dados. I'll set the shelf and I'll pin it with some brads. Before I pin it with the brads, I want to make sure that the shelf is square to the side, and I like to use these little right angle brackets, which I hold in place with some clamps. Rather than nailing from the side into the end of the shelf, which is not very strong, I like to toe nail the shelf in place, which is a much stronger connection, and I don't have any nail holes to fill. At the top of the base unit, there's no need for a solid wood panel. I'm just going to install some cleats, which will allow me to secure the top and the back panel. Now the backs of the two cases will be slightly different. Here on the base, I'm using a piece of pre-finished 1/4-inch plywood. I'm not sure if I'm going to paint it. And I'll just glue it and secure it with some staples. You'll note that I've run the plywood on the back almost all the way to the bottom of the cabinet. I will cut away some of the material on the back and the side, creating legs, which is much better for the cupboard to stand on. And the plywood will add strength to that delicate leg that's remaining. If you look behind the upper door, you'll see that the shelves have this bead detail, just like the one at Winterthur. We'll do that at the router table. I've installed this featherboard to hold the stock tight to the table as I push it through. I've installed a beading bit. The upper cupboard gets assembled just as we did with the base. All right, well, this is going to need a back, and if we look at the prototype, we'll see that the back is a little bit fancier in the upper case, just like the antique in Winterthur. They're beaded tongue and groove boards. Now, perhaps they did this because often the door might be open as it was in Winterthur, displaying items. Here are the 4 boards that I'm going to use for the back. I've thinned down some stock to 1/2-inch thickness, and I've jointed the edges so they're nice and tight. The first thing I want to do is make the groove, so I've set up a featherboard. I'm going to use just a saw blade. I want a narrow groove. I'm going to run the piece through, turn it around, run it through again, and that will center the groove. Here I've set up a dado, the sacrificial fence once again, and a featherboard, and by making 2 passes on the edge opposite the groove, I can form the tongue. I've installed a 1/4-inch beading bit and a featherboard to keep the stock tight against the fence, and that will form a bead on the face of the tongue edge. I installed the first board with a slight gap to allow for some expansion. These pieces get applied dry, no glue, and I just secure them with some 1-inch brads. Now here are the pieces for the face frame of the base unit, dry fitted. I want to join the pieces using pocket screws. A little bit of glue doesn't hurt on these joints, and to make sure everything comes out flush once the screw is driven, I like to clamp them together using these clamps and drive the screw. Now the face frame gets attached to the carcass just with glue, and we'll hold it in place with some clamps as the glue cures. I don't want to have any fasteners showing, and more importantly, I don't want any fasteners down this edge of the stiles where I'm going to form a chamfer later. Let's take another look at our prototype. The face frame on the upper part of the cupboard is a little bit different. The stiles are connected to the bottom rail with pocket screws, but this large scroll board up here is connected to the stiles with a tongue and groove joint, which will allow for some expansion and contraction. Now here's the face frame with the bottom rail already installed, and I've laid out for the groove. I'm going to use this slot cutting bit, which is a 1/4-inch bit, and I've set it up so I'll make a pass from each side, which will center the groove. Now we'll flip it over. Here's the blank for that scroll board, cut to the right length. Using the dado, I'll be able to form a tongue on each edge. Just a slip fit. And as you see, it approaches the end of the mortise. I don't want that to show, so I'll make a little notch in each tenon, and I'll round the end to conform to the cut the slot cutter made. Here, with the pieces of the face frame dry fitted together, I've laid out for the cutout for the door opening. And here I'm using a template that I made for the scroll board and the pediment. Most of these cutouts I'll make over at the bandsaw, but for these tight areas, I use my jigsaw. Now the only place I'm going to use glue on this tongue and groove joint is about the bottom 4 or 5 inches. I'm going to let the rest of it float. So a little bit of glue in the groove and a little on the tongues, and we'll put it together and apply a couple clamps. All right, now I've applied glue to the case, and just as I did with the base cabinet, I'm going to clamp everything, no fasteners. Well, we got off to a good start today. The 2 cases are built. Tomorrow we'll build a couple doors, we'll work on that pinched cornice, and we'll make some base molding. Well, today I got started by removing the clamps from the cases we built and sanding them all smooth. The next step is to do this decorative detail that's on each corner. It's a nice chamfer that comes down and ends in this little lamb's tongue detail. The chamfer is made using my chamfering bit, and I'll use hand tools to complete the detail at each end. Now that's what it should look like. When I built the case, this stile went all the way to the floor. I've removed part of it so I wouldn't see it beyond this decorative cut. Now these little glue blocks will further reinforce the back leg. Now I want to turn my attention to the upper door. Here are the parts. Here's the top rail. It has that nice arch. Here's the bottom rail. And here are the 2 stiles that I've clamped together so I'll have more support to use my router as I make the mortises. I'm going to connect the pieces with mortise and tenon joinery. The router has a guide fence and a 1/4-inch bit. Now I'm ready to form the tenons, and you've seen me do that before. It starts with this stop block and my miter gauge. The first cut is the shoulder cut. With the stop block in the same position and the blade raised to 1/2 inch, I'm now forming the edges of the tenon. For the next step, I use this device. It's a tenoning jig, and what it does is it helps me make the cheek cut safely. If we take another look at the prototype, you see that the upper door has this nice bead detail, which the antique original had. I can do all the straight runs with power tools, but this arch I'm going to have to do by hand. Using a 1/4 inch beading bit, I can produce this bead with one pass on all the straight pieces. See what I've done here? I've formed a bead along the piece, stopping shy of the opening I'm going to cut. I'll finish that corner by hand. Wherever the stiles and rails meet, I have to make a small miter in the bead and then remove part of the bead. Here's the blade set at 45 degrees and set just high enough to cut through the bead. Before I make the rip to remove the bead, I raise the blade to the maximum height so I can get as much of it as possible. All right, let's see how we did. That's going to fit nice. That takes care of the cutout for the panel. Now here's the door all dry fitted together, because I will want to take it apart later to fit the panel in and complete the cuts of the top rail. But I can do a couple machining steps now. Using a small round over bit, I'm going to round over the outer edge of this arch, and then I'm going to switch to a slot cutter and make a groove for the panel. Now this 1/4 inch wide, 3/8 inch deep groove will receive the flat panel. All right, we won't go any further with the upper door. We'll turn our attention now to the lower door. Here are the rails and stiles, and the joinery is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a cope and stick joint. I cope the ends of the rails, and I do a stick in the stiles, and they fit together like this. We make that at the router table. I make the cope cut first using the coping bit from the door making set, and I like this sled because it holds the piece secure as I push it through the bit. Now I've switched to what is known as the stick bit. It'll cut the groove for the panel and at the same time cut the corresponding joint for the cope. Traditionally, craftsmen would make these flat panels thicker than the groove, so it would give the piece some durability. In order for the panel to fit in the groove, they would bevel it to give it a nice, elegant look. We'll do the same. In order to complete raising the panel for the arch, I've pushed my fence out of the way, installed this starting pin. I'm going to guide the piece on the ball bearing. I want to be against the pin to start, bring the work into the bearing, do the straight edge, come around the arch, down and through. The machine leaves a radius on these panels on the inside, so I'm using hand tools to sharpen it up, really just for looks. At this point, we're ready to do some assembly with a little bit of glue and some clamps. While the door is set in the clamps for a while, let's start working on the base. This is not a two-piece base. The flat portion and the profile are all one piece. I'll make the profile at the router table. Now that's the first of two passes with a cove bit to start the top of the profile. Now I've changed bits to a 1/4 inch radius roundover to complete the profile. With the pieces of the base dry fitted, you can see that I've mitered the corners, and I'm using this template to lay out the decorative cut. When they're all laid out, we'll go to the bandsaw. To reinforce the miter joints, I'm cutting some slots for biscuits. All right, a little glue on the biscuits and the joint, and I'll attach everything with some brads. Now I want to work on the top panel of the base cabinet. I want to treat the edges, and that starts with a bullnose bit. Now I've switched to a wavy edge bit, and that will complete the profile. The top gets secured to the base with a few screws. Finally, we're ready for this pinched cornice, and I want to make these curved moldings first. It starts as a piece of 1x5, which I've set on top of the case, and I'm just going to trace the top edge of that cornice. Okay, that fits pretty good. Now the molding is 1 inch thick, so I've set my compass to 1 inch. If I put the point against the side, I just run it along the profile I've already made, and that sets the width. We'll cut it on the bandsaw and sand it smooth. Here I've installed an OG bit and a start pin. I'll guide the piece in and then run the profile. Using some carving tools, I'm going to extend the profile right into the corner. Using my pair of dividers, I can scratch in a little detail line. To make the miter cut where the molding is going to turn the corner on the case, I've set up a couple wedges. And I can slide it over until it lines right up with my laser, hold it securely in place, and make the cut. Well, now I'm ready to secure it to the case with a few brads. Not too much glue. We have a cross-grain situation, so I've just glued it at the corner. To complete the cornice, I'm going to need to make a couple little rosettes. I'll do that at the lathe. I've mounted a piece of poplar to a faceplate, and using conventional turning tools, I'll make that rosette. Just a little bit of glue and some clamps. I don't want to nail them because they might split. With the doors out of the clamps and all sanded smooth, I want to round over the outside corner with a 1/4 inch radius. Now I'm using a rabbiting bit to create a rabbet so that the door will sit over the face frame. Well, the only way to form the bead on this arch is with some hand tools. That'll take a little bit of time, but once that's finished, this project is headed off to the paint shop. After studying the antique and looking at the digital photographs that I took, it was still uncertain what the finish was. I asked Greg if it was milk paint, something you often see on antiques. He wasn't sure. But we were sure of the contrast between the color of the inside and the outside. The inside is this nice rose color, and the outside is going to be this bluish green. Now I'm using latex paint because it goes on nicely and it's very durable. However, before I start the color coats, I prime the piece first after sanding it and dusting it off. And I learned a good tip from an old painter once. Whenever you're trying to paint the inside of something like this or a window, you always start with the area that's furthest away and work yourself out. It's a good lesson. Well, here it is with its final coats of blue paint on the outside. I have some hand-wrought rat tail hinges, which are still available today. And look at the inside. Recognize this color? You should. It's just like the original. It's a beautiful and I hope useful piece. Now let me tell you what we have in mind for next time. Occasionally we take a program or two and dedicate it to the use of a single tool. This time it'll be the table saw, Table Saw 101. Over 2 programs we will tell you how to go about selecting a saw, setting it up accurately, making sure you use it safely, and building jigs and accessories to make it more useful. That'll be next time right here in the new Yankee Workshop.